This is the Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 9th chapter. Please stand for the reading of the Gospel. Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and curing every disease and every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." This is the gospel of our Lord. You may be seated. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and from our Lord Jesus Christ. Speaking of old jokes, while I was sitting here this morning, it occurred to me there's an old saying about going to church. I think I learned it from a Baptist. And the old saying was, "Listen very closely to what the preacher says." And then they went on to say, if the preacher talks about alcohol 3 Sundays in succession, make sure you start smelling the breath of your preacher. Makes sense, doesn't it? If your preacher starts talking about adulterous relationships 3 Sundays in a row, have somebody from the council check the church office and make sure nothing's going on. Okay? Well, I can tell, this is going to sound bad, I know. But what I want to say is, I can tell there's something going on with me. Don't worry about that. But there's something in this world that is just worrisome to me. And I'm finding that as I sit down to preach, I am kind of struggling with exactly what to say about it, because there's so many different sides to things, especially when you're involved in a community of faith. How do we do that in a complex kind of world? Last week, and I ask your forbearance as I kind of work some of these things through. Last week, as we prepared for our first call, search, visioning meeting of the congregation, I made what I meant to be here in church several off-the-cuff statements. I was concerned that in some previous sermons I had made some statements that sounded, for me, overly judgmental, specifically about other religious groups, especially that religious group, let's be clear, which is generally today called the evangelical right in the media. My concern was and is that as this group has become more and more clearly identified in the public's mind, they have come to be the faces that we see on the national news. The people who are commenting on the important issues of the day and therefore are more and more taken to be the ones who represent Christian faith in the public sphere. Especially, I think, for people who are not aware that Christianity is a very diverse thing. Don't you think if we took a poll in the congregation about any particular topic this morning, don't you think we would find a diversity of opinion, no matter how specifically it was related to our Christian faith? Because we feel differently. We see things differently. Now, here's the thing. Are you bearing with me? The reason I raised this matter and the reason I'm trying to clarify my thinking this morning is, as I mentioned last week, I see it as a great temptation in preaching and in teaching to use criticism of the beliefs of others as a crutch for teaching what we believe. I can remember when I was a very young pastor, just coming out of seminary, so well schooled in all the important things that are taught in seminary. And I sat down with a new member group and started to teach them about what we believed as Lutherans. And pretty soon I found myself saying, you know, well, we're not like the Baptists because we don't do this. We're not like the Catholics because we don't do this. And I started to realize I wasn't feeling good about the way I was teaching. I needed to be teaching about what we believed and why it was important, and not pointing fingers at other people about what they believe. It's a great temptation to use criticism of the beliefs of others as a crutch, really, for teaching what we believe. And just as we witnessed in this past week's shooting at that Republican gathering for baseball practice, everybody tuned into that? Wouldn't it be amazing if somebody who came to worship this morning had not heard about what happened on that occasion? Just as we witnessed that, it seems to me we need to be keenly aware of the potentially destructive results to what we teach and to what we preach and to what people are receiving on Sunday mornings in our rhetoric. Years ago, when I was a much younger pastor, I became good friends with my Presbyterian colleague, and we decided to do some things together. My new mission congregation that didn't even have a building worshiped at the YMCA, and his established congregation, and we began to do some things cooperatively, Lutherans and Presbyterians together. And I remember so well, one year we did a Maundy Thursday service together, as we do in this community. And I got a letter from my bishop and said, next time you do something with the Presbyterians that involves sharing Holy Communion with them, would you let me as the bishop at least know what you're doing? At that time, we didn't have what's now known as altar and pulpit fellowship with the Presbyterians. And it was one of those very gentle slaps on the hand to me as a young pastor from a very beloved bishop, which I well understood. But it was kind of a neat service. It was a Maundy Thursday service, complete with both wine and grape juice. Just imagine. There was a small book on that Presbyterian minister's shelf, and it had a title that I haven't forgotten. The title of the book was, I'm Saved, You Are Saved, Maybe. I'm saved, you are saved, maybe. In those 6 words, the author summed up that precious historical temptation in Christianity to regard what I believe as most holy and to cast doubt on the belief of my neighbor, which means what? Casting doubt on their belief means ultimately casting doubt on their worthiness, does it not? We may find ourselves part of the problem instead of the solution. The hard part, honestly, for me is the simple fact that Christians with whom I often disagree seem today to be married to the political process in today's world. Does that make sense to you at all? The people who say they are part of our Christian faith, and I believe them, they are our brothers and sisters, with whom I so often disagree, seem married to the political process that happens in our world. One of the things that concerns me is the fact that research, and I know you're aware of this because I've heard you talk about it, some of you, research is showing that those who are leaving practicing Christianity in large numbers today often indicate in that research that the reason is they're tired of being lobbied on Sunday mornings about their political beliefs. They're tired of it. Well, all of this comes down to me, to something pretty simple, and that is that I was taught in Psychology 101, first of all, do not fall into the belief that you can control the whole world. Okay? Makes sense, doesn't it? Don't believe you can control the whole world. That does not mean being passive. We express our point of view as people of Christian faith, and that's very, very important in today's world. Just don't think you can control the whole world around you. But second and most important, again, according to Psych 101, see what you think, we can and should be responsible for defining ourselves, especially in terms of Christian faith. Know what you believe and own it. Do not be led by the nose, by the latest swaying of religious or political thought, or by charismatic leaders who want to grab hold of your nose and pull you in their direction. Know yourself. And I might add, for interim purposes, know what this congregation, Bethany Church, is truly about. Which is a very long way of saying, as we have now entered the long green season of Pentecost, we have a challenge before us. All through this summer, even though it feels like the summer is fleeting, doesn't it? As we walk the dusty roads of Nazareth, at Jesus' side, each Sunday, let's take advantage of the opportunity to watch, to listen, to hear what is being said, and then integrate into our thinking and our living and our congregational interim process what we are learning as we walk along together. At this, as you've heard the gospel this morning, at the start of this long season, the ministry of Jesus is just forming, right? We're early in the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus is calling out his disciples. People are gathering. Crowds are coming to hear and see what's going on. What's happening? There's healing taking place, right? The poor are discovering they have a special place in the world. The prisoners are even finding that they are being visited in prison. And I forgot to take my cell phone out of my pocket before I came out. Maybe it'll be quieter if I put it over there. Who's trying to get a hold of me in the middle of worship? Must be Father's Day, which is the announcement I forgot. Barbara Lee reminded me in announcements. Happy Father's Day, everybody. Fathers all know we aren't as important as mothers, so that was just a joke. The poor, the imprisoned, all of those people who are in such need in our world. Those who are caught in having been labeled as sinners. You are a sinner, right? So I can point my finger at you and say, look at you, Dave, you sinful person. Sorry, Dave. Even those people are finding their place at the table with Jesus. Now, Scott, I'm going to ask you to do this. You want to just back us up to the gospel? What did we learn today? Jesus went about all the cities, and here was what happened. And I'd like you to just call out, in the little bit of time we have left, just call out what the action verbs are in here. What do you see? A little louder for my old ears. Teaching. Proclaim. Healing. What? Curing.
Send.
Send is in there, and that's going to be important.
Petition.
Petition.
Ask the Lord.
Oh, petition. Ask the Lord. You must be a musician. You're confusing me. Okay, so all those action verbs are in there. And if we stopped and had the time to take this morning, we would ask ourselves, well, okay, what's that about? Teaching what? What is so important that it needs to be taught in terms of Jesus? What is really being proclaimed in the world that the world so desperately needs? What's this curing thing about? Compassion. The saying, the asking, the sending. And then if you look for descriptive words in here, what do you see? Starting with the word good. We might ask, what is good about the news that Jesus shares? What other descriptive words do you see in here? Every. Yeah, that one jumps out at me. Every disease, every sickness. What else? Harassed and helpless. What a powerful description. I have always really appreciated those words. Anything else? Plentiful. And we might then be asking ourselves this morning, okay, what's that all about? It says the harvest is plentiful, not the harvest will be plentiful someday if we can just gather up enough people. What's that all about? So real quickly, as we start this long summer's journey with Jesus, on the road. What was that, Jack Kerouac?
Yes.
Xavier, you must have read Jack Kerouac in college. On the road. Let's say we're on a road trip this summer, okay? Because that sounds kind of fun, doesn't it?
I don't think we'll have as much Benzedrine as Jack Kerouac had.
As we go along on this road trip, this summer's journey with Jesus, what are we going to notice? Is it not true that we're going to notice there's a particular flavor, spirit that imbues this walk with Jesus? And maybe what I'm suggesting is in Christian faith, maybe sometimes we lose sight of that spirit that's all about healing and love and care and compassion for a world that is harassed and helpless. And we find ourselves caught up instead in something that's more like discord. And I want to get my way in this world. I want to be right. There's a window. We call it a hermeneutic in preaching, through which we are looking at it. All has something to do with that spirit, the love of Christ being given to the people. And then we notice as we go along that in one way or another, everything that happens is somehow not about them in the gospel, but it's about us, isn't it? It's always about us, not in a self-important way, but, and by the way, and also not just about others. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. I heard somebody say the other day it would be nice if Bethany could get more church members to carry out its mission. There are two ways to look at that. One is to say, we got to get more people because then the offering plate's going to be more full. Or, our job is always including a wider and a wider and a wider circle. Why? Because Jesus said, those people are out there. They're in the neighborhood. They're in our workplaces. They're all over the place. And they need to be invited to be a part of what's really significant here at Bethany. Okay, that's it. I've taken too much time as usual, but Scott, could you real quickly look at those pictures at the end? What do you see here? What'd you say, Patricia?
People praying.
Praying, okay, praying. At first I thought you said crying. And it hadn't occurred to me that these might be people who are grieving because something terrible has just
I think
happened.
it's all of that. I think it's a group hug. I think it's prayer. I think it's support.
Group hug?
Yeah.
Maybe when we're doing the passing of the peace some morning, I'll call for a group hug. It kind of feels like that anyway. Okay, next. Can you see that clearly, Barbara, from the very back?
Yes.
Anybody know this? McGill University in Ottawa. It's called the, oh gosh, I just forgot the adjective with it. It's the crowd, anyway. And if you look closely at it, what does it look like to you? Okay, a couple of words. It's a little bit hard to see, I bet, from the back. I've got two other views of it that we'll look at in a minute. What do you think about the person who's pointing the finger? Who's that, do you suppose? Say again, Meg?
He was pointing at something and everybody was scared.
Okay, he's pointing at something, and boy, at least the person in back of him doesn't look very excited about it. Yeah, but maybe some of the others are going, oh, maybe they're starting to catch on to what he's pointing at. You can't see it from this angle, but that figure that's just to his right and back of him looks very much like a Christ figure. I don't know if it was intended to be or not. Let's try the next one. And just skip to the next one, Scott. Let me see if that, again, if you can see from way back there, what happens is you go from the front to the back where people, they look like they're in agony back here.
Yeah.
You know, like they're really lost or in pain or something like that. And when I saw it, all I could think of was being a congregation and how we're always kind of in the process of going, this is where we need to go, this is where we need to get to. But some of us are kind of going, a part of me is going, can we really do that? Do we have the resources? Is that really possible? And so there are all flavors of feelings and emotion evolved in being a part of that. Is there one more?
Yes.
Oh, and this is called the Knowledge Bench. Has anybody ever seen one of these? They're in about 10 cities around Canada and the United States. It's called the Knowledge Bench. Can you see what the boy has in his hand?
And that one?
Looks like an apple, doesn't it? And I suppose you could get into talking about Adam and Eve, but I don't think that's the intent. I suspect it has something to do with education, since it's across the street from the first one we looked at McGill University and in front of the library. And so maybe this gets us to thinking about how can we sit down on that bench and be the ones who are growing in knowledge so that our thoughts, our prayers, and our actions as Christian people move in a good direction as we follow Christ. Amen.